Republican Senator Pat Toomey just called on President Trump to resign, saying it's what's best for the country.
Breaking news, a second GOP senator is now calling on President Trump to resign following Wednesday's deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol. This coming just one day before what could be the start of his second impeachment. Eyewitness News reporter Leticia Juarez live from home with the breaking details. Leticia.
Well, good morning, Rachel and John. That's right. Breaking this morning, we're now hearing from Republican Senator Pat Toomey, who is calling on President Trump to resign, saying it's best for the country. Now, this comes as Twitter has silenced Trump on their platform. He's also been silenced from other platforms after the riots that happened on Wednesday. Now, big tech is also taking some steps to make it harder for the president's supporters to communicate by taking action against the far right-wing platform Parler. Apple has removed the app from its store, saying it's home to violent threats and calls for illegal action. Google also removed Parler from its Play Store, and Amazon booted it from its web hosting service after Parler users celebrated the violence at the Capitol.
Hey everyone, your host Adam here. So let me tell you what actually happened, because the truth is more interesting than the fantasy. Multiple impeachment resolutions have been filed against Trump in the 119th Congress.
All right, welcome back to NBC News. Now we've got some breaking news. The House just voted on a motion to table articles of impeachment. Danny, for a lot of people, this may seem overwhelming. These articles of impeachment just introduced last night. We've already had a vote today. Could you kind of run us through what's gone on here?
These are not the articles of impeachment that people expected to be brought against Donald Trump. And as expected, and we're seeing live happening right in front of us, they're going to go nowhere. Generally laying out he's just a generally bad person. But what we know from the history of impeachment is that maladministration, even being a bad person, has historically not been enough to rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors.
We're talking about HRES 353, HRES 537, HRES 939, 7 articles covering obstruction of justice, abuse of trade powers, bribery, and what one resolution literally calls tyrannical conduct. One accuses him of calling for the execution of members of Congress.
Republican Senator Pat Toomey just called on President Trump to resign, saying it's what's best for the country. Toomey accusing the president of impeachable offenses for his role ahead of the rioting on the U.S. Capitol. The siege by the president's supporters left 5 people dead, and the FBI searching this morning for many suspects still not in custody. Hours after the riots, Toomey said he too is disappointed with Trump's loss, including here in PA, but he would not set aside the will of the people of the Commonwealth. As far as the impeachment, he said he is waiting to see what argument House Democrats lay out in the coming days.
Which he actually did on Truth Social, when he said 6 Democratic lawmakers who made a video telling soldiers not to follow illegal orders were guilty of seditious behavior punishable by death.
Now to Washington, where President Trump accused a group of Democratic lawmakers of sedition, calling their actions, quote, punishable by death after they released a video urging members of the U.S. military to refuse illegal orders.
He literally wrote that. The president said sitting members of Congress should be punished by death for a 90-second video about the Constitution. Then his Justice Department under U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirolo actually tried to indict those lawmakers for sedition. And you know what happened? A federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. said no. They refused. Not a single grand juror agreed there was probable cause to charge these people for reminding soldiers they have a right to refuse illegal orders. That almost never happens. Grand juries almost always go along with whatever prosecutors ask for. The old saying is, a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. This grand jury looked at Trump's DOJ and said, "You have got to be kidding us." That is a huge deal. But it is not Congress voting Trump out. Here is what the impeachment situation actually looks like. In December 2025, Representative Al Green forced a vote on the House floor on his impeachment resolution. It was a privileged motion, so leadership could not bury it in committee. Republicans moved to table it, which is Congress speak for killing it. The vote to table passed 237 to 140. But here is the part that matters. 140 members voted against tabling. That means 140 members of the House said, "We want this impeachment to move forward." That number was almost double what it was the last time Al Green tried this in June, when only 79 Democrats sided with him. Support for impeachment nearly doubled in 6 months. Even Democratic leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, Pete Aguilar, shifted from voting to table in June to voting present in December. They did not support impeachment outright, but they refused to kill it. That is movement. But it is not removal. It is not voted out. Anybody telling you otherwise either is lying for clicks or does not understand how the Constitution works. So today, we are walking through exactly what is happening, what Congress has actually voted on, where the real cracks in Trump's power are showing up, why the "voted him out" headline is hype built on real but incomplete moves, and what this means for the next 9 months heading into the midterms. Because the truth is way more complicated and important than any thumbnail can capture. To understand the full picture, you have to look at this from multiple angles. It is not just about impeachment, it is about a pattern of resistance inside Congress that keeps building but never quite breaks through to where Trump actually loses any real power. That gap between growing resistance and lack of consequences is exactly where clickbait lives. The creators slapping "Congress votes Trump out" on thumbnails are taking real events, real votes, real defections, real cracks in Republican support, and packaging them into a fantasy of instant accountability that has not happened. I am not saying those creators are evil. They know frustration is so intense that if you put "Trump" and "out" in the same title, you get million views because people are desperate for something that feels like the system is working. But the system is not working the way people want. Pretending it is does a disservice to everyone who needs to understand what is actually going on. Let's walk through the real votes because they matter even though none have removed Trump. First, the impeachment resolutions. There are at least 3 formal impeachment resolutions in the 119th Congress. HRES 353 was introduced by Representative Sri Thanadar and lays out 7 articles. Obstruction of justice, abuse of trade powers, bribery, creating an unauthorized government office run by Elon Musk, and more. HRES 537 was filed by Al Green. HRES 939 was the one Green forced to the floor in December with articles focused on Trump calling for the execution of members of Congress and intimidating federal judges. All formally state that Donald Trump is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. But here is what people do not understand. Filing articles and actually passing them through the House are completely different things. Even if the House passes articles, that is only step 1. Under the Constitution, the House impeaches, which is like an indictment. But only the Senate can convict and remove, requiring a 2/3 vote, which is 67 senators. Democrats do not have anywhere close to that. They do not even have a simple majority in the Senate. So even the most optimistic impeachment scenario ends with Trump still in the White House. That is exactly why Democratic leadership has been cautious. When Al Green forced that December vote, Jeffries and his leadership team said impeachment traditionally requires a comprehensive investigative process with thousands of documents and dozens of witnesses and hearings, none of which has been done because Republicans control the House and will never let a real impeachment investigation happen. So leadership voted present instead of supporting or killing it, the political equivalent of saying, "We agree this guy probably deserves impeachment, but we are not falling on our swords for a vote that cannot succeed right now." Now here is where the Congress turns on Trump narrative gets more interesting because it is not just about impeachment. There have been a string of votes where Republicans broke with Trump on real policy in ways that are significant even if they fall short of changing anything. In January, 5 Senate Republicans, Rand Paul, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Todd Young, and Josh Hawley, voted with Democrats to advance a war powers resolution forcing Trump to get congressional approval before further military action in Venezuela. That was after the U.S. military seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a surprise raid, and Trump started talking about controlling Venezuela's oil. 5 Republicans crossed the aisle on foreign policy. That is genuinely rare. Trump went ballistic, posting those senators should never be elected again. The White House launched a pressure campaign and flipped 2, Hawley and Young, back. The final vote was 51-50, with Vice President Vance breaking the tie to kill the resolution. The system held for Trump, but only barely, only after enormous pressure, only because 2 senators buckled. In the same week, the House tried to override 2 Trump vetoes on non-controversial bills that had passed both chambers unanimously. One was about a Florida Native American tribe. The other authorized water projects in Colorado. Trump vetoed them in what everyone assumed was political retribution. When override votes came, 24 Republicans voted to override on the tribal bill, and 35 voted to override on the Colorado water bill. Neither got to 2/3, so both overrides failed. But 35 members of the president's own party voting to override his veto on a bill that originally passed unanimously is a big, flashing warning sign. Then just this past week, the tariff vote. 6 House Republicans crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats to overturn Trump's tariffs on Canada, passing 219 to 211. Trump threatened any Republican who voted against tariffs would suffer consequences, but 6 did it anyway. The week before, the grand jury refused to indict the Democratic lawmakers for sedition. Even Republican Senator Thom Tillis came out and said the attempted indictment was political lawfare, not normal, not acceptable, and needs to stop. When you put all this together, the impeachment resolutions, the December vote where 140 members supported moving forward, the war powers defections, the veto overrides, the tariff rebellion, the grand jury rejections, the Republican senators publicly criticizing Trump's DOJ, you see a clear pattern. The walls are not closing in the way thumbnails want you to believe, but they are getting thinner. The cracks are getting wider. The margins are getting tighter. The fear of crossing Trump, while still real, is starting to lose its hold on at least some members of his own party. That is the real story, not Congress voted him out. The real story is Congress slowly, painfully, one vote at a time, starting to remember it is supposed to be a co-equal branch. Trump's grip, while still strong, is not as iron as MAGA branding wants you to think. So what does this mean going forward? Why should you care about the difference between clickbait and reality? Because getting it wrong could hurt the people who want accountability most. If you believe Congress already voted Trump out or removal is right around the corner, you set yourself up for disappointment and disengagement. You think the system is handling it and you can relax. But the system is not handling it. The system is inching forward painfully slowly, while Trump continues to consolidate power, threaten judges, weaponize the Justice Department, and govern as if the Constitution is a suggestion. The reality right now in February 2026 is this. Impeachment resolutions exist on paper, but are not going anywhere while Republicans control the House. Democratic leadership is not pushing impeachment because they believe the smarter play is winning the majority in November. The votes that happened, the tariff rebellion, war powers defections, veto overrides, are significant cracks, but ultimately symbolic because Trump can veto anything and there are not enough votes to override. The grand jury rejections are a remarkable check on the DOJ's worst impulses, but do not restrain the president himself. Trump's approval sits around 37 to 42%, with 6 out of 10 Americans disapproving of his tariffs and his net approval underwater by double digits. Those numbers are bad, but not catastrophic enough to force his party to abandon him. Not yet. So what would it actually take for Congress votes Trump out to become real? Here is the constitutional roadmap, and it is steep. First, Democrats would need to win the House in November. Polls say that is possible. Historically, when a president's approval is this low heading into midterms, his party loses seats. If Democrats flip the House, they could launch real investigations, subpoena documents, hold hearings, and pass articles of impeachment. That is step 1, and it is achievable. Step 2 is where it gets nearly impossible. You would need 67 senators to convict and remove, meaning at least 15 to 17 Republican senators would need to break with Trump. Even with the cracks we see, the Tillis criticism, Collins defections, Murkowski and Paul independent streaks, we are nowhere near 17. You can count Republicans willing to publicly cross Trump on one hand, maybe two on a good day, but definitely not 17. Trump knows this, which is why he threatens everyone who defies him, because he knows enough Republicans will stick with him to prevent removal. The most likely outcome is not impeachment and removal. It is Democrats winning the House, launching investigations, holding dramatic public hearings, passing articles along party lines, and then the Senate either refusing to hold a trial or holding one and acquitting along party lines. We have seen this movie twice with Trump, once with Clinton. The question is whether the political environment changes enough between now and November to make that vote mean something different. Trump's own behavior is his biggest liability. Every time he threatens to execute members of Congress and his DOJ tries to indict them and a grand jury says no, that is a story reaching voters. Every time he threatens to block a bridge creating jobs in Michigan and his party awkwardly defends it, that is a story. Every time 6 Republicans cross the aisle on tariffs and he threatens to primary them, that is a story. Every time his approval drops another point with independents, that is a data point moving the needle. None individually are enough to remove him, but together they create a picture of a president governing through threats and fear rather than consensus and competence, whose hold on power depends entirely on his party being too scared to challenge him. That fear is starting to crack. The question for the next 9 months is whether those cracks widen into something real, or whether Trump's pressure machine holds the wall together one more time. That brings us back to the thumbnails and why this matters for you. The people making Congress votes Trump out videos are selling a frustration fantasy. They take your legitimate anger and package it into a product that feels satisfying to click, but leaves you less informed. The danger of frustration fantasies is they replace action with consumption. You watch, feel a dopamine hit of, oh good, they got him, and then go on with your day without doing anything, without calling your representative, without registering to vote, without volunteering, without understanding how power actually works. The truth is messier, slower, more frustrating than any thumbnail. The truth is Trump is still president. His party is cracking but not broken. Impeachment exists on paper but not in practice. Not now. Not with this Congress. The real check on this president will not come from a single dramatic vote turned into a viral clip. It will come from millions of people showing up in November and deciding whether the cracks are wide enough to walk through, or whether Trump gets 2 more years of unchecked power with a Congress too afraid to say no. That is the stakes. Not a thumbnail. Not a fantasy. The actual stakes.